The House Financial Services Committee will be looking at the future of housing finance today. Here now with a preview, Representative Spencer Bachus, ranking member of the Financial Services Committee. Good morning, Congressman. Good to see you.
Good to be with you.
Look, you speak with somebody who starts with the premise that Fannie and Freddie shouldn't even exist. What are you going to possibly accomplish with yet another hearing about what to do with housing finance today?
Well, we're going to have to decide whether the taxpayers will be at risk, whether the government will continue to subsidize mortgages, whether the past failures have been a lesson or a warning, or whether we'll ignore the history of continued government failures to price risk and for the taxpayers to ultimately be responsible. Every government insurance program has operated at a deficit and has required taxpayer subsidies and taxpayer bailouts. And that's why we want to take the taxpayers off the hook.
The supporters of Fannie and Freddie argue that without them, mortgages just won't get done in the United States, that we desperately need them in order to support the level of home ownership in the United States. Do you believe that? Or if they did not exist, do you think the private market would step in and provide mortgages?
Well, Becky, right now there is an addiction to government funding, and we have to break that addiction. Now, with any addiction, there is a long withdrawal process, but you have to start. You have to start now. And you can't start with an explicit government guarantee. Now, the industry and the Democrats have really formed an alliance, and that alliance says that the government needs to continue to guarantee these mortgages. So as Paul Volcker has said, anytime you have an explicit government guarantee, you privatize the profits and you socialize the losses. And that's really what we'll end up doing again. The lenders will make money on successful mortgages. On those that fail, the taxpayers will pick up the losses. And we Republicans say we're not going to do that. That's not what the American people want. They
Governor
don't want to
Rendell
pay
has
for
a
someone
question for
else's
you.
failure.
What you said, Congressman, I think makes a lot of sense. But what's the answer? Do you get rid of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? I mean, I think that's the pivotal question.
Well, Governor, I think it's whether there's going to be a government guarantee. We all know that it's going to be a transition process, but yes, Governor, we actually want the government to get out of the mortgage business. We want the private market to come back, and as long as the government is subsidizing these mortgages, the private market really is disadvantaged and will not come back. You know, the government has basically taken over the market, and as you know, government doesn't always do it better than the private market. In fact, I think one thing this country was built on is a free enterprise system and capitalism, and I think a lot of people have lost faith in that. And I, for one, and I think most on our side of the aisle, still believe that the private market and entrepreneurs and competition in the private market, not the government subsidies and the government running the show, is the best approach.
Well, what you say, again, it has a good, strong ring of truth about it, but how do you think the private market did in the last 4 or 5 years?
Well, Fannie and Freddie were buying a lot of those mortgages. Freddie and
But leave that
Freddie,
aside. I understand what you're saying, but how did the private market do on its own? Did they do a pretty good job, or didn't they get us into the ditch?
Well, some of them did very well, some of them didn't, but the government came in and bailed out AIG and companies that did not. Now, I think you bring up an interesting point, and I think we'd all agree, Republicans and Democrats and independents, that the subprime lending to people with questionable credit, no down payment, and high loan-to-value rates got us in trouble. But, Governor, that's what Fannie and Freddie are doing today with their Affordable Advantage program. Now, they've teamed with states, and I know Pennsylvania is one of those, to give people, even people that are unemployed, cheaper mortgages and letting them count their unemployment benefits as income. And we just think that's a mistake. We think that's that history teaches us that the government, when they get involved in these things, social policy trumps economics and sound business practices.
No, again, a lot of what you say makes sense, but go back to the private sector in the mortgage business responsible.
Well, I guess
for a
you could
lot
say
of
the
what
private
we're-
sector has paid back nearly everything with the exception of AIG, but
Right.
Fannie and Freddie are on a permanent.
And I agree.
Right?
We
I mean,
should
when
do
it
something
when it
about-
comes to handling the response, the
The-
private sector actually did far better than the government.
Right, but the private sector and bundling these mortgages, that's what got us there. And Fannie and Freddie contributed.
Enabled by Fannie and Freddie.
But if you give the private sector 1% interest rates, and then you give them Fannie and Freddie to buy all the bundled stuff, and you give them a fee to put on top, I mean,
All I'm saying, Joe, is that there was blame
But
to
you
go
can't
around.
separate Fannie, say, well,
No, and I
Fannie and
agree.
Freddie aside. How do you say Fannie and Freddie
We should have dealt
aside?
with Fannie and Freddie in
Yeah.
the financial responsibility bill. That was a weakness, and I think that weakness lies on the shoulders of the Democratic Party. We should have done something about it, too. But, gosh, don't just say it's Fannie and Freddie. The private market was
Right.
just abysmal
But
and
saying
irresponsible.
that the private market is going to have greed and fear. I mean, we know we've seen Tulip Bowl. We know that that's that if it's unbridled, it's going to.
Make sure that we don't have that unbridled.
I don't think
fear again.
without Fannie and Freddie, it would have been.
Representative Bachus, you want to weigh in on this?
And Joe and Governor, let me say this. I think the real question is that whether it's a private lender or it's Fannie or Freddie, when they make a mistake, who ought to pay for it? And if it's Fannie and Freddie, we know the answer to that is the taxpayer. If it's a private lender, it ought to be that company. It ought to be the investor. It ought to be the lender. And instead, we're spreading that loss over taxpayers. And as the governor knows, Pennsylvanians are having a hard time just paying their own obligations without obligating them to pay for other people's failures. Now, yes, there were a lot of problems, and people bought homes, and sometimes they assumed that the prices would continue to go up. And we're not blaming those people. We're just simply saying that other taxpayers should not have to pay for that bad deal.
Representative Bachus, good luck with your hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.